Okay, so we're going to kick the meeting off, and I have the time as 6:32, Tiffany. And I'm going to pass to Todd for just to get us started.
Well, ultimately, it's good to see everybody. It feels like it's been about 5 years since we've seen each other, but I'm glad everybody's here. Ultimately, Jeff and I have lots of great stuff to cover with Jared, but really glad everybody's here and everybody's healthy, at least from what we can tell, and that is a beautiful thing. Do we have any, Tiffany, do we have any public participants at the meeting?
No one's messaged me about talking. So.
Okay. I'll take that as a no. As far as course of business, the next thing from a course of business is going way back to our minutes back on May 4th. And we need to approve these minutes if there's no questions or changes that are needed to it. So I'll need a first for that.
It's actually the June meeting, right, Todd?
Oh, sorry.
That's
yeah,
okay.
June. May feels like 4,000 years ago, but we do need to approve these. So
Motion.
Can I get a motion? Thank you. Who was at the motion? Sorry.
Aaron.
Hey, Aaron. Need a second? I can't see everybody on one screen. I apologize. So who's second?
I'll second. Patrick.
Thank you, Patrick. All right. So let's do hands in the air on the screen for approval of minutes. I see Patrick, Aaron, Jeff, Ramesh, Mashul. Sorry, you're not on screen, just FYI.
This is the host. If you can't see somebody on the screen, you can go into side-by-side mode in the view options on the top, and you can simply click and drag the bar between the presentation and the views and the people to see the maximum amount of individuals.
So I believe
there's a message in chat that Tushar having trouble getting in.
Yeah, he is having trouble. We do have majority on that vote. So Jeff, I am going to pass back to you.
Okay, sounds good. Our first agenda item, we wanted to talk a little bit about the next 90 days and just kind of get caught up. We were really hated to do it, but we had to cancel the July meeting. And I want to, off the top here, I want to address that. The reason the meeting was canceled was because we have a significant stakeholder who felt that the board might be working a bit off track. And in particular, our city manager, Mike Land, just kind of got the sense that we were too focused on day-to-day operation of the city and not focused enough on the future, being futurists, helping the city understand what, from our perspective, we felt was important to prepare the city for, and then how smart city tech would fit into that. And the bad news is we had to cancel that meeting. In lieu of that meeting, we had a meeting with Mike and we talked through that. The good news is it was a really fantastic meeting. And we shared the framework, the definition, the work of the board thus far with Mike. And we talked through this idea, of what the board has done. And we talked through the sense that Mike had as we were too focused on day-to-day operations, and concluded that the board, in fact, is on the right track. Mike has a great appreciation for what the board has done thus far. And I just want to kind of talk to, we came out of that meeting with two follow-ups. and I'm going to get to the follow-ups last, but I kind of want to talk through what we spoke to Mike about and presented to Mike. And by the way, just yell out if you have a question as I go here. But we talked to Mike about where the
Ramesh
board.
has a question.
Sorry.
Ramesh, did you have a question?
Yeah, Jeff, maybe you're going to cover it, but at some point, I'm curious to understand what drove Mike to have that concern. So you can answer it later if it
Okay.
makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we did was we walked through with Mike the importance of the definitions and the importance of reaching a consensus on the definition of a smart city, because that definition then focuses us, it gets us on common ground and focuses us on the important things to think through and talk through in terms of recommendations. If we have a common view of the definition of a smart city, then it's easy for us to work through recommendations. We talked about where we are going for inspiration, and we talked about the takeaways that we got from the Future IQ study. We talked about some of the comments that the mayor had for us at the first meeting and that the city council had for us through West Mays. And we talked through the fact that we wanted to make sure that we were really paying attention to what the residents of Coppell had to say, and we were doing that through the Future IQ study. And Mike, I think, had a great appreciation for the fact that we're paying attention to who those stakeholders are. One of the key things we wanted to get out of that is make sure that Mike understood that we view him as an important stakeholder as well. And then we talked through the framework that the board came up with, the importance of establishing a framework so that the ideas, the goals that are established by the board are people that come onto this board after we're through, new stakeholders that come onto the city. We want to make sure there's a framework in place that endures changes in the smart city board, the makeup of employees at the city, et cetera. So we talked through the importance of the framework in doing that, the importance of the framework in ensuring that the city had technology, that the city was prepared from a technology perspective, that the city was prepared from an organizational asset perspective, et cetera. Then we got into, and by the way, Mike was very appreciative of that. Then we got into scenario planning. And one of the things we talked about was that, it'd be great if the Smart City Board could take problems that were specifically identified out of the Future IQ study and look at how, in a scenario planning exercise, how those problems might grow over time, what the implications of those problems might be, et cetera. So we talked to Mike about the fact that we're going to have to solve that problem because Future IQ actually didn't do scenario planning. And one of the follow-ups that we came up with is I think it's really around that topic. We also talked about the fact that the board has discussed trends and has discussed the future. And some of those things we talked about was the trend working from home. We talked about autonomous vehicles, transportation as a service being an important trend and an important, it's important to have city policies around autonomous vehicles. The fact that that will have an impact, obviously, on tax revenues with less petrol sales in the city of Coppell. We talked about shopping, how shopping might change and how autonomous delivery could impact the city, how the city may need to have policies around that. In fact, probably will have to have policies around that. We talked about data collection, the importance of modeling. We talked about 5G. So we talked through a number of things that the Smart Board has talked about in terms of future trends. And after that, and we talked about the process. After that, Mike's feedback, and Todd, Vicki, Jared, if I feel like my description is a little bit off, correct me. But after that, Mike basically said, okay, you guys are on the right track. You need to keep doing that. You need to keep on the track you're on. He no longer thought we were too focused on day to day. However, we did talk about two changes. Change number one is Mike wants to make sure that we have access to futurist content. His thinking was that we should have access. I think he maybe is a reader of Fast Company and maybe gets a lot of good ideas from Fast Company. He felt like we should have access to Fast Company, and he's actually setting some sort of a subscription up for all of us so that we can have access to Fast Company content. He also mentioned the Futurist. I don't know if anyone here has a subscription to the Futurist or has looked at the Futurist. It's pretty good. And he said something about looking into whether or not the city should support all of us having access to Futurist content. So action item number one was for us to have a conversation, see how comfortable everybody is with their access to Futurist content and their ability to think forward and sort of project, if you will, the types of problems that the city should be thinking about and how smart city tech can be used to address those trends, if you will. So that was follow-up number one. Follow-up number two was to make sure that, because as we kind of thought through what we've discussed thus far on trends, my kind of thinking on it is, well, we've really talked about trends that, in my opinion, will play out over the next decade. I would say that we've not perhaps thought further out about that second decade. So I think we've talked about some things that are likely to play out from 2020 to 2030, but we haven't had a focused conversation on what's the world. I guess you got to be careful because we don't want to guess, and projecting is very difficult, but we do need to have a conversation about what's the world going to be like in 2040. What are the trends that will start to play out in the decade of 2020 to 2030, but then will mature and become something the city needs to deal with out into 2040. And just as an example, Mike felt that there might be changes at DFW Airport. It's possible that there could be new technology. There could be, he was interested in vertical takeoff and landing technology, but there might be other things like quieter airplanes or electric airplanes. And as an example, he said, we really should be at least having that conversation and understanding whether or not there's any smart city component that might be associated with changes at DFW Airport that would then alter the land usage and land management policies of the city. So our second follow-up was to make sure as we talk about the next 90 days, I'd like for us to actually try to do this in August, but we're going to make sure that we have a meeting that's strictly focused on Coppell 2040, how cities will be impacted by trends and how those trends will play out between now and 2040, what the world is, what's possible in terms of what the world will look like in 2040 and how the city of Coppell ought to prepare itself for that. So the great meeting. Again, the follow-up was keep doing what you're doing. Just please make sure and think farther out to that 2040 timeframe. Any questions about that?
I don't have any questions. I'll just kind of throw a little bit of clarity around Mike's example. So I know some of you know, but some of you might not understand. The current land use development or plan that's in place on the west side, which is mostly warehouse areas, is driven because of the flight path of the airport. So planes have to land that way. FAA limits what we can build in that area. So if that was to change, then we would be freed up to make changes to our land use plan. If that helps, if that was a question you guys potentially had.
I want to pause in case anybody has a comment. I honestly, when I went to the meeting with Mike, I kind of had a problem with a bit of that, you know. I felt we should have kept going, if you will. I felt confident we were on the right track, but it was a really good meeting because I came out and it's clear that our city manager is in full support of the board. He even made some comments about, look, if you guys, you know, I don't think we want to jump on this, but even made some comments about, look, you guys need some budget allocation, make sure to bring it up. Go through Vicky, but bring it up and make sure that he understands what that budget request is, and so he can jump on it as quickly as possible. The really good news is we gained a stakeholder out of that whole process, or I should say, a strong supporter.
Jeff, Aaron has a question, and I know we need to come back to Ramesh's comment also. Go ahead, Aaron.
Is there a path forward to improve communication so that he's better informed?
Yeah, we talked about that, Aaron, and what we talked about was we asked Mike if he'd like maybe to have a monthly meeting just to say, hey, here's what we're talking about. Here's what the current state of the deck is. And Mike's response to that was he needed, I think, Vicky, Jared, check me if I'm wrong, but what I heard there was, well, I got to be kind of careful because I can't get too involved with any particular board. So he felt that wouldn't be the proper way, if you will, to make sure that communication gets cleaned up. Now, having said that, I think what I put on our list here to bring up at maybe the next meeting is to see if maybe we ought to set a meeting up with Mike and just give him after we do the futurist discussion, maybe we should set a meeting up and just give him a kind of a rundown of that. I think it would be a good idea to have another meeting to give him a rundown. But he did say he had to be careful about being too involved with any one board.
Okay.
Jeff,
That's a good question, Aaron. One we asked as well.
One thing I would add to that, Aaron, to your question is, again, we're still a very, very quote unquote new board, right? I mean, even though months have gone by because of COVID, but we're still a new board, but we are moving really, really quickly, mainly because A, it's a technology play, and B, we've got lots of people on this board that are used to moving quickly in business. And, one of the main reasons for the conversation, to address Ramesh's comment, was that Jeff and I specifically had a conversation with Jared and Vicky and said, let's make sure that where we stand today, we're on track at the top, right? That we're all the way good to Mike. What do we need to also do city council wise? File it under kind of a heading called Seek Clarity. Are we all on the same page? All of us have been in situations where you're moving the head fast, but you might have a stakeholder that you're not on page. And next thing you know, stuff gets derailed. And so Jared and Vicky did a great job, had the meeting with Mike, walked through the deck of where we were. And that led to Mike just asking some questions around, well, tell me about this, tell me about that. And there were some process discussions that Mike raised a question and said, that sounds more like Jared's job instead of the smart board's job. Am I hearing that correctly? And so once Jeff and I got that feedback back from Jared and Vicky, we said, hey, we need to have a face-to-face with Mike so that we are all on the same page as to where we're headed, what's the intent, what the board is getting feedback on. And so, Ramesh, that's what led to that good discussion. And then, again, being a new board, I think the communication, on the day-to-day, week to week, month to month, from Jared's position and then Vicky's, I think will obviously happen better just because we're going to have a little more time underneath our belt, and we'll have some very specific things that we're making recommendations on. So I think part of it is we're new. How does this work? Number one. B, COVID, and then C, this was the time for us to get on the same page, right? And just make sure there was no stuff kind of floating outside of scope. But I agree with Jeff. I thought it went really, really good. Ramesh, I don't know if that answers your question or not, but that was my attempt to do that.
Thank you.
I saw it.
Jeff, could I also just add that when you were discussing the scenario piece about we have had further discussions about hiring Future IQ to come back and just talk and meet with the smart board so we can get some clarity around the scenarios, and that's part of the discussion that we need to have with you and Todd about what that might look like, so we can determine the scope of work for that.
Okay, that's great.
We already have some money budgeted that we can use, so we're looking at what that total cost might be.
Okay, good. Nikki, was I fair to the conversation that we had with Mike?
Absolutely. I mean, I thought it was a great conversation, and Todd, you're exactly right. When Jared and I talked to Mike about where you were at with the last time around, I think what he heard was a lot of the processing piece, and I really felt like you were on the right track, but he didn't hear that from us clear enough, and it really is helpful to have that direct one-on-one conversation with him to get exactly what he's thinking out in the open. So it was a good conversation.
Okay, fantastic. Anybody else? Okay, sounds good. I do want to talk about the next 90 days as well. The good news is I think we gained a supporter there. The bad news is we missed our July meeting. I really, and Todd and I kind of talked this over this afternoon a little bit, and I think I can say we really would like to have a package of the Smart City Board recommendations to the city in October, by that October 5th meeting. In order to do that, I think that would be, I think we need to fit another meeting in between now and then so that we have 3 meetings after this meeting. And so tonight we're talking about the recommendations that we all prepared for the July 6th meeting. Now, those are important because that gives Todd and I material from the board that we're going to package into our deck and then feed back to everybody, so that everybody can look that over and say, oh yeah, this is where we're all at from a recommendation to the city perspective. And when we package that, I think we can probably go ahead and loosely put it in a roadmap format to feed back to you guys. So I'm thinking that's what we'll do out of this meeting tonight. If we stick with our current cadence, our next meeting would be September 14th. And Todd and I are thinking that let's see if we can, August happens to have an extra Monday in it, I think. August 31st is a Monday. So I'm hoping that we can agree to have a meeting on August 31st. Look at the packaged recommendations and some sort of a draft roadmap in that meeting. Look it over, but focus on these futurist topics in that next meeting, which I'm hoping we can do on August 31st. That way we can update that package and then hopefully have a pretty solid deck for review then on September 14th. And then out of that meeting, sorry.
Just for clarity, the 7th would be, September 7th would be the next scheduled on our current cadence. So yeah, that would be the 31st, and then the following Monday, we'd have another meeting.
Okay.
That's back-to-back Mondays.
Yeah, maybe we got to talk that over. Maybe it's August 24th and September 7th, or maybe it's August 31 and September 14th, but just something like that.
Just for clarity, September 7th is Labor Day, if I remember correctly. So I think that's why we were saying the 14th.
That makes sense.
Aaron, was that what you were about to say?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. That's why I wrote down September 14th.
We still have holidays. That's good.
So, okay, so what we would do then is we would, I think if we did things that way, then we would, on October 5, I think we could have a deck for review. And that deck that we have on October 5, I'd really like to have some kind of public comment period or public presentation. I don't know in the age of COVID exactly the best way to do that. I'm sure Jared can help us out with that, but some kind of public review in October so that we're in a position of whenever the city council is ready in the months of November and December, we can present to them. So that's the tentative thinking about the next 90 days. Our last agenda item tonight is to go back and revisit those dates so that we can talk through the meeting cadence. I wanted to present it here just to tee it up. And then before we finish tonight, we'll come back to those dates and see how everybody looks on those dates. Okay, any issues or questions?
I think we're good,
Hey,
Jeff.
Jeff? I'm sorry,
Yeah,
Jeff?
Nikki, sorry.
When you were talking about having a public review of the deck, are you wanting to have residents come in and take a look at what you're proposing? Or perhaps maybe the 2040 committee, executive committee come in? What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know. I don't, as broad a review as possible is my thinking. I don't know what the best approach is.
Well, I think we need to think about it because it might be something that we just take straight to council for maybe a work session presentation.
Yeah, that was going to be my thoughts. I think a work session in October that's a good kind of target.
Mm-hmm.
But work sessions right now look almost like a regular council meeting, to be honest with you. So
yeah,
because it's in a Zoom environment with, it's a hybrid really. So it's not really in the conference room. It's just really going to be published. So it'll be open as a regular council meeting. So
yeah, which it is anyway, but
right,
just in a different setting.
correct.
Maybe there's a way to we could all go out and talk to people, find interested parties, and see if we could, in that October, either the October 5 meeting or maybe a working session after that, maybe we can find a way just to get some more people, some resident participation, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
I would, if you feel, Vicki, if you feel, and Jared, if you feel like, well, before you go out to the public, the city council needs to look it over first. If you feel that way, then we do it that way. At some point, I'd really like to get some public participation here, though.
And I think that if we do some scenario work with Future IQ, that it would be appropriate to do some focus groups of some kind that would give you the avenue to do that, to take it out to the public.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that'd be great. From my perspective, that'd be great.
Jeff, one thing to think about time-wise, with that call we have Future IQ, and I think, Jared, you set that up for tomorrow, but for the entire board, there might be some work that could potentially come out of that could maybe change the timing, of getting some of that feedback. I don't know. I don't know what we're going to get done on that call, but I'm just wondering if that might lead to a different timing scenario to get that feedback. Jared, I saw you nod, and I don't know what your thoughts are, but.
So just so we're clear, so we have set up a call, and this is not with Future IQ, it's just internal staff. Tracy, Vicki, and I. Tracy worked direct with David at Future IQ doing the 2040 study. So we wanted to get her in the loop as well. This is really to kind of, it's a meeting to ask what are it's really to ask more questions of what we think we are looking for, what you guys are thinking you're looking for from a scenario planning study. And would it include focus groups? And would it, what does that look like? And then we can start to define a scope that we could go back to Future IQ with, and say, here's kind of what we're thinking, come back with a proposal for us. And then from the budget dollars that we have available, we can see what can work. Okay.
Hey, Patrick, before we move off of this, I'd love to hear what you think about the public comment, getting public feedback.
I mean, we're kind of hamstrung by the fact we basically went to Zoom right as we started this thing. I mean, it would be nice. I think one place you might get at least some of that is the idea that Jared and Vicky are putting out there, which is take and get some feedback at work session. That usually is the way this gets handled within, a board trying to move something further along, to then see whether it's actionable by council, either in terms of budget, whether you're going to have Future IQ come back. I don't know how that's going to sit, but that's a decision that's got to sit with them because they're the ones who are ultimately going to pay for it. So I think taking it through that sort of route becomes an important thing. I mean, I don't know what the stomach's going to be like in the current environment for going out and getting a consultant, but better to let other people decide that who, actually face voters. And some of them will be facing voters in November.
Okay. All right, thank you. If everybody's ready, let's move on to conversation around recommendations. Everybody ready for that?
Yeah.
Okay, so who wants to start?
Jeff, I'll throw just a couple things out there and then we can move from there. But
Okay.
you probably know that mine are going to be around kind of communication broadly. So my recommendations, at least at the moment, because I know we've talked about a lot more in detail, so we'll save some of those for later. But I think ultimately recommendations have to do with the process with the city and the citizens for understanding the actual value proposition of what we're going to be offering. So I think there needs to be a good way that there is value identified to any recommendation that there is. And so that value doesn't necessarily have to be a dollar amount, but I think we need to help define value. The second one is determining a communication strategy from Smart City Board to council to city. Since we're still new, I think we're kind of fighting our way through that, but I think we're going to get good advisement. But ultimately, the recommendation is what's the best way for that communication strategy. So I'll stop at a high level there, and we can get into more tactics.
What are the recommendations that we currently have in the draft form? Should we take 10-15 minutes to take a look at it and apply the concern that Mike had to see if our recommendations are forward-looking and 2040 related?
Mike, yeah, we should definitely, Ramesh. I mean, my thinking here is with the framework we put together, we're essentially making a set of recommendations around putting these foundational building blocks in place so that those building blocks, and I think what I would call organizational assets, are in place so that Smart City Solutions will connect and create values. The question is, from a futurist perspective, the question is, what are those problems that the city is going to face that the foundation, with using the foundational building blocks, the city will deploy. And my view of it is, well, let's listen to our stakeholders. They were very clear that they think resource scarcity is going to be an issue over the next 20 years. And that the city should put in place, and I think the quote was something like an operating system for resource management. And so one of the key, I would call it portfolios, but one of the key areas will be, we're going to make a recommendation that that a resource management platform be installed on top of this foundation using these organizational assets. I'd like to get more detail on that, but as a starting point, let's say that, number one. Number two is it's really, really clear that in the future, the citizens of Coppell feel that traffic management is going to be a real problem. If we think work from home is going to if we think work from home is going to be something that over the next 20 years, a higher and higher percentage of Coppell residents are going to work from home, that'll solve the traffic problem. Then we should recommend kind of a deprioritization of that issue. But so far, what we're saying is over the next 20 years, it's going to get worse and worse. We're going to have housing that's going to be maybe vertical in nature. We'll see what the Ford board comes up with. But in order to grow the tax base, city's going to have, and relatively landlocked, city. Well, we're going to have to grow the population, and with that population growth, we're going to see a traffic problem. And so, one of the futurist recommendations is that we should install traffic management systems. Plano has just initiated, I'm sure Jared, you know about this, but Plano has just initiated an aggressive traffic management smart city solution. And I believe that they funded it. I don't think they started the implementation process for it, but they're looking at changes in traffic flow through sensors on traffic lights and signs and various places throughout the city. If that's one of our futurist recommendations, then we should make it. We've talked about the fact that the mayor has signed up for the climate action objectives that were established in Paris. I think was it 2015? We've talked about that, and we've talked about the fact that if we feel, and I think I don't get a sense for the board on this yet, but if we feel that the citizens of Coppell will need to adapt to climate change over the next 20 years, I certainly feel that that is the case, then we should make a recommendation that the city of Coppell develop a climate action plan. We may want some specific things in that climate action plan. Like I think we need to have a discussion about whether or not municipalities will generate their own electricity to some degree over the next 20 years. If that's the case, then that's a significant land usage issue. Obviously, we can bring that up with the city. We talked about citizens have asked that smart city technology be used to improve inclusion, improve connections between disconnected neighborhoods. I've got a recommendation. I worked up on that, but I believe that we should be looking at customer engagement platforms that address that. I think it's easy to look at the city and say, if we already have citizens who are saying their neighborhoods are disconnected, they will walk past between those disconnected neighborhoods, and they want some means to drive inclusivity between those neighborhoods, then I think Smart City does have some solutions for that, and we should make a recommendation around it. The other thing that we clearly said, I believe, is that innovation is going to play a key role in how the city advances in the future. And so we should make a recommendation around this innovation hub concept that the citizens of Coppell have kind of put to us, I think, and said, what can be done from a smart city perspective to drive innovation, to drive maybe even reskilling as automation takes jobs, as automation has an impact on jobs. What can the city offer in terms of helping people over the next 20 years reskill and be ready for that new job market? So far, those, in my view, are the top five, the big five, if you will, that we have established that these foundational components and these organizational assets would address that from a smart city perspective over time. So I think the thing, and pardon me for being so long-winded, Ramesh, but I wanted to just remind everybody of those big five that we've already come up with. If there are other things that we feel from a futurist perspective should be on that list, if you will, should be packaged as we're going to make some recommendation around it, then now's a good time to bring those things up. But remember, we do have those big five. And by the way, I do think there's more than that, but we've not had a chance yet to have a conversation around that. Ramesh, if you want to have that conversation now, I'm up for it.
So again, Jeff, thank you very much for recapping those five. I think you covered the big rocks. I definitely agree with you. Those are all important. And maybe I'm bringing this up late in the game, but I see this as a 2-year effort by the Smart City Board, right? So what I would like to throw to the audience is, since the futurist article was mentioned, I don't know if it was mentioned by Mike or others, does it make sense for us to take a couple of cycles to go, each of us look 1 month or one quarter of those magazines, come back here and say, hey, here is what others are thinking of could happen to their city. Does it apply to Coppell? Should we put that in the backlog beyond those five? So I'll pause there. I just wanted to throw something out there, and please don't misunderstand me. I'm not trying to throw a wrench in the process. I'm just trying to see if the city is expecting more research and more ideas from us in addition to the top five.
Yeah, Ramesh, you didn't throw a wrench into it. What you did was you brought up a topic that I think is exactly the right topic. When we make these recommendations right now to each other, I want to just recap the big five, but I think there's more than the big five. On our framework, we just put a box out there and said, there's more than that. I think your idea that everybody should kind of go out to their own futurist content, wherever you go for futurist content, I think it's a good idea you're bringing up, Ramesh, that we should all go out to those places that we go. In fact, let's have a conversation about where we all go. And I think in this next meeting that we have, if you know of any you want to bring up tonight, please bring them up. But in the next meeting that we have, I think everybody's got to be prepared to say, look, I think Coppell's missing. It's not just those big five. I think there's a big 8. And here's the 3 that I think Coppell might be missing. I think, Ramesh, you're exactly right. That's exactly what we should do for this next meeting.
And also to add, those big five are important, but I have a feeling that the city council has already put some thought into those five. I think they might be looking for us to come up with things that they have not even, not even in the radar. As an addition to that, it's not like I know of a source that I can go and start referencing tomorrow. Perhaps we could, as a group, discuss if there are 1 or 2 sources out there, then say, okay, Ramesh, you take 6 months of publications of this source, and then you go do your research, and then so on and so forth. So then I can come back and say, here is what I've learned from reading through 6 months or 6 weeks of articles.
So Jeff, could I just chime in here and say that Mike has set up a subscription for the Smart Board for Fast Company, as you mentioned. And I think Jared has the instructions on how to sign into that.
Yep.
Is that right, Jared?
Yeah, so it's a shared account, and there's a little bit of difficulty with the instructions, so I want to make sure that it's clear. So I will hopefully get that out to you guys all tomorrow. Basically, the way it's a shared account, so it looks a little funny, and so when I add folks, you got to make sure you don't use your email address, and there's some other kind of details that I want to make sure it's very clear in the how to do it. Because like I said, it is a shared account, and anyway, but I'll get that for you.
Yeah.
The comment that I want to throw out there, Jeff, you mentioned the solution in Plano. Again, what I want you guys to remember, and as we talk about futurist stuff, is those are solutions that are in play today, and we have some of those solutions in play today. We have a traffic management system with sensors. We monitor traffic, and there's lots of things that we're doing with that going forward. We've entered into an agreement with Dallas County, and we're actually going to put some. It's basically communication down to the vehicle level. So the interesting thing on that technology is that it's in the newer cars today, right? That actually talk to the traffic signal that knows when the light is about to turn red, and therefore it will slow the vehicle down. So for me, I want you guys to remember that those are things that are happening today. So if you're looking at the futurist and you're looking at vehicles, and I would be looking at the changes in the vehicle types, the way they move. Is it going to be aerial? Is it going to be, because if you follow Uber, right? Uber helicopter and some of these other things that are going on, there's going to be a change, I believe, in all of those things. And there for a while, there'll be a hybrid, right? You'll have your traditional vehicle and you'll have the new vehicles. How is that going to look? Are there pathways that we need to consider in and around Coppell that would be ideal for those types of pilots? Again, land use development that's related to those things. Is there going to be an Uber helicopter pad at North Lake, right? I mean, all of these types of things we need to these are the things that I think they're wanting you guys to be researching and coming back with ideas, because that's ultimately what we're trying to accomplish, right? So, does that make sense?
It does make sense. I'd have to say, Jared, my recommendation would be to collect data in Coppell, get the sensors out there, collect data, and not necessarily commit to any TMS implementation until you really collected and modeled out the data.
So that's where, again, if we, and so I want to throw this out too. If we want to hear from our resident expert on traffic management, we have one. And so Kent would love to come and tell you what he's doing and what all the integrations that they've done and all the fun things that they've got going on. So I think that's something else that we can do. And if we kind of tee up a meeting around one of those big five, we can kind of go through, here's what the city's already doing today, just again, to give you guys more impact. What is on our roadmap? Because that was there's a disconnect between what is already in play and what's in the future that we've already identified as staff. And so I want to make sure that we're clear on that, because like I said, I know Kent would be happy to come and tell you exactly all the cool things that they're doing and how they see it playing out. Same with resource management. So
Kent in one of our meetings?
I think he was in one that I missed.
Okay.
One of the early ones, maybe the first one.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's have an offline discussion about the agenda. Maybe we'll have Kent in the next meeting to talk about that.
Okay.
I think, Jared, I think there's a lot of frustration around traffic, and so when we say there's traffic technology in place, there's a wall that goes up, and so some conversation about what it could be, how bad it could be, versus what it is. I guess we all sit at a light that is red for 5 minutes with no other traffic around. It's like, how smart is this? So those little frustrations come out. So it's
right. No, I get it, and
nobody's gonna be completely happy ever.
Yeah.
So,
exactly. Yeah, and it's Yeah. So again, Kent is the expert on those systems, and so I don't want to necessarily overstep for him. But yeah, I know that we've had a lot. We want to, with specifically the change in the work. I think the weekend schedule is what's running in Coppell during the week, which is unique. So there are predetermined schedules based off the data, right, that run the traffic signals, and there are other things that sensors in the ground and all kinds of things that indicate, as well as cameras that look for the vehicle in the image that makes a determination of when the light should cycle. I can tell you that they're not perfect. And then we've also had some connectivity issues related to switches. That's getting into the weeds. But yeah, I mean, again, Kent is the guy. They've done a lot of data collection already on traffic in Coppell. It did flip overnight with COVID, the patterns coming through Coppell. But regardless, it would be great for you guys to hear him and take you through the history of what all we've done, what's already out there, what's on the roadmap. So you have a little more insight into where we're headed.
You know, Jeff, from a category standpoint, back to your 5, big rock recommendations, maybe ought to be 8 or 10. I think the category of communication of services, whatever those are, is going to continue to be an important one, and will never be good enough. So if we look at 2040, so for example, let me back up. So for example, every one of us has access to literally almost the packages down to the street level that we ordered from Amazon, right? We can almost time when packages are going to come to our house because we're all doing that. But yet we can't time how long it's going to take me to drive from my house to Kroger. Okay, but all that data exists. So I think there needs to be some recommendations around, from a smart city standpoint, is just how do we take data, regardless of when that data is available, but make it useful to citizens. So that goes back to my value proposition, and that's an infrastructure and that's a presentation mode, but that constantly has to improve. And Patrick, you held up your cell phone, right? So there needs to be ways that, regardless of what a cell phone is going to be in 20 years, which will probably be, some Apple, Google Glass embed contact into our eye, and an AI function from Elon Musk that will go straight to Mars with. We just have to have that data, and it needs to be processes to make that very valuable, down to the second.
Again, I just want to reiterate that when you're talking about being stopped at a traffic signal today in Coppell, that is today, and we have folks actively working to make those things better. I am more interested in Elon Musk AI that potentially be in their vehicle that will then potentially, if it is sensing that there are no other vehicles around it, and therefore the light will on its own change without us having to be in that game. So there's potential for those types of some scenarios. And again, if Elon gets his way and he's got a flying vehicle, you're gonna land on top of Kroger, right? And so how do we support that infrastructure?
Well, actually, Jared, it's going to be a tunnel.
It
won't be. It'll be boring. It'll be Boring Company, because that's going from LA to Las Vegas right now. But yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to say what's going to happen tomorrow, but I am saying that the amount of data that's being generated by the city today is going to double, tomorrow. And how do we make sure citizens, from a communication standpoint, understand the value of that data?
Yep. Yeah, I'm happy to get Kent to get you lots of talking points and lots of examples of the work that they're doing.
Yeah, to me, it sounds like, and Jared and Vicky, please stop me if I'm paraphrasing you guys too much. To me, it looks like the city is looking from us to say, what's going to be the reality 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, and not worry as much, at least in phase one, about how the city goes about implementing it. Is that accurate? Is that what you guys want us to be focused on?
Yes, from my
I
perspective.
would say yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as an example, you want us to say this committee with 90% certainty thinks that in 10 years you're going to have flying cars where drivers are not going to be focused on driving. With that scenario, here are the 4 things that'll have an impact on Coppell. So you just want us to give you the vision, and then when the timing is right, you'll figure out how to execute that idea, correct?
Right.
Okay.
But in going back to what Todd has said, I do think it's important that we collect as much information along the way as we can. Because we may not know what we need at some point in time. There may be something that we collect that we don't use now, but we'll need it later.
Okay.
And I also believe that the traffic management, it's what we do today is we're looking out maybe 5, maybe 10 years. And so we don't know what's going to happen in 20 years, but that's going to be part of a future traffic management plan or system. So it's just a matter of, as we go along, what do we need to be prepared for?
Okay. So Jeff, what do you think? What do you think is the next best step?
Well, honestly, I thought that did everybody prepare recommendations for the meeting tonight?
Yeah, but mine seem to be in the weeds at this point.
Yeah, we're definitely in the weeds. I was hoping that what we would do is just go to each board member and the recommendations that you had for the city, you talk through them so that we could then package those for the next meeting and sort of project out those recommendation areas. And I do think what Ramesh brought up is exactly right. There's not a big 5, there's a big 12, there's a big 10, there's more than 5. So I was kind of hoping that would come out in the conversation. If nobody has prepared recommendations, then is that accurate?
I'm sorry, Jeff. What is the last part? Nobody has.
Well, okay. The deck that we sent out, we asked that everybody read through the deck and then prepare specific recommendations for putting that framework into place, and specific recommendations on what action should the city take in order to act on smart city opportunities, focused on the framework, focused on foundational elements, organizational assets, but also focused on value creation, because as we said, we've got the big 5, but as Ramesh pointed out, there's more than 5. Did everybody read through the presentation that we sent out? So we ask everybody to be prepared tonight with making specific recommendations to the city so that we could add that to the deck and put that into the package. If what I'm kind of hearing is that the board isn't really prepared with specific recommendations.
Well,
is that right?
Jeff, go ahead, Mushal.
So, I think everybody had some plan for the recommendation, but given what we heard about your meeting with the city manager, it just tells us that we haven't done enough research and listen to the city officials that what they would like us to do, right? So that kind of, I think, confused everybody at this point. And, it's kind of, I'm at a point of like, I have some recommendation and like, it doesn't apply at this point because we may have to do more research to kind of formalize those recommendations.
Okay.
My take on it.
What I would recommend then is that that we go. I think we should go to the last agenda item. We should set up our follow-up meeting, and we should all do that research and be prepared with those recommendations for the next meeting. Then.
Sounds good. And if we still have time today, and then if we want to brainstorm, each of us can throw out there what we think is going to happen in 10 years, 20 years down the road.
Yeah.
And start. At least that way, each of us will know the kind of questions that the rest of us are going to have when we go and start researching.
Yeah, I would say let's do that. Go for it.
Right. So I have a couple of trends that I see happening, and maybe we can kind of create a template on how we go about with this idea. So the first one that I want to propose is the volume of data. So we're already up to Blu-ray level of video, and then people are going to be streaming a whole lot. So in not 10 years, 5 years down the road, will we have the infrastructure to be streaming at 1 terabyte per second? So, or rather, the statement should be, city should be ready to be able to stream or handle 1 terabyte worth of bits per second. So if that is the problem statement, so a question for you, Jared and Vicky, do you want us to stop at making that statement, or do you also want us to go one level below and say, here are 2 things the city should do?
I would say we can absolutely start with the first part. Getting into the second part where you're making that direct recommendation of what we could do. Mm-hmm. I think that is where it's kind of a fine line of, you're not saying this is what we should do. This is where you see the trend, and this is what others are doing, where, potentially what the city could fall into, or you could potentially go this route as well.
Okay.
It's kind of it's not a direct answer, so I apologize, but that's my first reaction when I hear that.
Okay, all right. So what I'm hearing from there is when we come up with a trend, if we have the information, we should be able to share with you that, hey, here is what San Francisco is planning to do, and then you will take it from there.
Yeah.
All right. The second trend that I see happening in 10 years is I think all of driving will be autonomous. So today Tesla is hugely popular in Bay Area and in LA because even if it's a 2-hour commute, people are getting in and just letting the car drive itself. If that being the case, Coppell was probably going to be 100% autonomous 10 years down the road. And here is what LA and San Francisco is doing. So X, Y, and Z.
You're not taking my car, Ramesh.
Well, so you bring up an excellent point, right? So 10 years down the road, if 90% of people are autonomous driving and Patricks of the world don't want to, that brings a problem number 2. What's Coppell going to do about that
I can think of a handful of city council members who would not be happy if you told them they had to give up their gas guzzling muscle cars.
That's an excellent point, and I think we should think about
it's one that, it's one you've got to think about how those pieces interact, because you are going to have some people who are never going to trust an autonomous car.
Right. And maybe that means the time frame moves out from 10 years to maybe 20 years. We are looking into a crystal ball here, right? So we can only come back and say we believe with 80% certainty that.
And then what are you potentially having to add into those roads so that the autonomous cars can operate on? That it's going to mean rethinking. You're not going to repave Parkway the same time 20 years from now as what we just did. Right? It's going to be done totally differently because you're going to have these things in there, around this.
Right. And you make a good point, Patrick. The way I see it is that might go into a little bit on the execution of how we make that happen, right? The reality is there are 20 to 30% of cars on LA roads today that are almost or semi-autonomous. So if we push that out, I think it's fair to say that in 15 years, maybe 50% of cars in Coppell will be semi-autonomous. So if we made that statement, maybe we as a committee don't have to go into what Coppell has to do for that. That's something for Jared and Jared's successor to worry about.
I think that statement, Ramesh, pretty much nails it, right? Is we need to let Jared and the city know this is coming. And then from a scenario planning and what do we do, then, Jared, that's your work, with city council, with Mike, with the staff, right? So to your point, right? Autonomous cars are coming. My Tesla, I'm not going to be driving it that much. I'm going to be leasing it out to a bunch of other people. And so there's a very good chance that there's going to be about 70% less cars on the road. What does that do? What do we do with our parking spots? What do we do with, there's going to be an entire shift in commercial real estate. We needed to say, here are the potential commercial real estate changes that are coming, which is going to seriously affect the west side of our city, i.e. property tax or sales tax and property and everything else. We need to let Mike and team know, here's probably the 3 things that could be coming. Then you guys are going to say what to do with them. And I think that's exactly what you just said, Ramesh.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, I really think transportation as a service is the future. I think autonomous cars just kind of play into it, but I think especially with adapting to climate change, there's going to be a lot more forced carpooling, if you will. Car ownership is going to decline. Patrick will still have his car, and those city council members with the SUVs, but by and large, I think car ownership is going to decline. And that's why I say I think you really want to model those things into the next 20 years before you invest too much in transportation management system. I know there's some things that just need to be fixed today, in the next year or two or whatever, but I think for the long term, I think it's transportation as a service will be the model.
Another category, and we've talked on a little bit, is just, we'll say the category is, let's just say real estate. Housing is going to, is making big shifts just because of the age. We're going to be past baby boomers. So we're going to have a massive housing change that's going to potentially affect, it's going to affect everybody, but it's going to affect Coppell in specific ways. And then from a business real estate standpoint, there's going to be a lot of these commercial real estate buildings that are just going to have to be shifted. There would be a different use pattern, a different use case for real estate than there currently is in 20 years. And I think we need a model, or at least go get some information, to say, here's what that looks like in 20 years. So I think that's a big category. To Ramesh's point, things that we ought to go look up to say, here are where it's headed.
Yeah. And I think scenario planning can play into that. It depends upon the expertise of Future IQ or whoever you choose to do that. The scenario planning can actually play into that.
So another trend that I see that is bound to happen is, especially a city like Coppell, where I think there's a sizable amount of people that are climate conscious. I think the use of solar panels is going to increase, which means the power coming in from someone like Ancor's gas, right? Who is our electricity provider? So, and that is the quantity that we purchase is going to go down, which means the unit cost that the power company is going to charge us is going to go up. How does that impact city operations?
And Ramesh, to piggyback on that, as we move to more work at home scenarios, is the city holding the power distributors and delivery entities accountable for uptime, as well as internet? You monitor the Coppell Facebook page 3 to 4 times a week. Some section of the city is going without internet or power. Thankfully, I'm not on that side of town, but is the city proactively keeping our providers accountable to make sure that our residents can work from home?
Well, we're about 18 months away where it's all going to be delivered by satellite, so we don't have to worry about those wires anymore, right, Aaron?
Cut the cord.
Right, but remember, the thing that changes with that then is, the city leases out a franchise right to Encore and the other utility providers. And if suddenly they say, well, I don't need to maintain that fiber in the ground anymore, and it all gets abandoned, that changes that whole franchise agreement between the city and the utility providers. So that's something to be, that's kind of a big picture thing. But what happens is that changes with your utility providers. Yet you've got other stuff where it's not going to change at all. Water line, sewer line,
right,
gas line.
I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced that because of COVID-19, we're going to see a long-term impact where our life is going to change, as in people are going to stay and work from home more often. I do believe that slowly but surely the ratio of working from home will go up from perhaps a low 10% 2 years ago to a high 40% 10, 15 years from down the road. But if that were to happen, obviously people who now live in Coppell and drive down to the downtowns, what is to stop them from moving even further out? They would say, hey, let me go buy an acre lot and then live in the exurbs. So are we potentially going to see an decline in population? There's a possibility.
One comment I have, most people move to Coppell for school district. So that's one factor will always be there. There is a potential chance, like you said, people that doesn't have school going children, they will be tempted to move out of the city. So that will be that change there.
You make an excellent point, Marshall. I think as long as we have a good school district, that's going to be the glue that keeps people here. And to your second point, I think even today, families that have kids go off to college, I think there are some that choose to leave Coppell because they want to save on taxes. But that's a good thing, because now that home opens up for a young family to move in. So.
What about the microgrid, energy microgrid? Do we have a plan for that? Because, about a few years ago, I went to a energy conference, and there is a new idea about decentralized energy distribution and generation. So, that's due to the natural disaster and how interconnected we are, and then all of a sudden something happens, there is a domino effect, right? So there is a trend of energy decentralization and having microgrids in different parts of the country or region. That way, the city has more control over it in terms of who they purchase electricity from, or as far as the outage and all the other complexities. So that solves some of the problems. But did we ever consider that as a future item how will that play in our smart city initiative, or even city of Coppell in general? Jared?
So what I can tell you is, I do know that we've looked at, I've been to some of those conferences as well. Schneider Electric was really big into some of this stuff, smart city stuff I guess it was 2012, 13 kind of time frame. One of the issues we have in Texas is the way the power is distributed. So we're kind of, until we start to see some changes there, and Ramesh mentioned solar and other power producers, I think the microgrid scenario is kind of limited. We're not going to give up, certain real estate for some of this as well. So it is definitely something that's still a consideration. I mean, because what we're starting to see, when we started talking about smart homes, we started talking about smart energy, and so there's a whole kind of package you can get there. If you look at some of the new developments, I'm trying to think of, it's a city in Florida, brand new development. They came in and they installed, basically it's a micro power grid. It's almost its own little kind of utopia, if you will, but they provide home Wi-Fi, internet connection, fiber to the house, television services. They're providing everything to that house. The house is completely run off your phone. All that stuff's happening today. So does that get into the microgrid conversation? Yeah, we still see, I think from what I've read, the power distribution is still the issue there. And we're still limited because of the franchise agreements that we have. Also, we have Encore that ultimately handles most of North Texas, or all of North Texas. You can buy the power from anyone because they resell it on the exchange. So you have the ability to choose from, you can buy it directly from TXU versus Green Go Energy versus, all these different energy providers, but that is not tackling the fundamental distribution of the power, if that makes sense.
Right, so that kind of gave me one more idea or question in my head is, we know most of, all of Texas is owned by 4 distribution companies, right?
Right.
And, in next 20 years, do we anticipate there will be more players in the market, or getting consolidated to one, because energy distribution, like any kind of distribution network, is a constant maintenance, and policy changes, everything can affect their operation. So anticipate any changes into that infrastructure in the next 20 years, or something for us to think about?
It is definitely something for us to think about. But our relationship in that typically has been a consumer, right? Similar to I mean, with the exception of what Patrick mentioned, the franchise agreements allowing people to use street space, or we give them a easement to run, these things. Beyond that, we haven't really said you have to do it this way or that way. So do we have the potential to say that? Maybe. I mean, that's interesting. It's an interesting thought.
Jeff, I think another category ought to be kind of lumped into demographic / I'll call families, housing market. I mean, there's some pretty interesting projections in the next 15 to 20 years that single family housing skyrocket. So if we look at single so how is that A, affecting Texas? B, how's that affecting the Metroplex? So I know this is a housing forward committee type deal, but coordinate and look at what they're coming up with, because if single family housing is the fastest growing and you look at the population of what it's going to be like in 20 years, does that mean that Coppell could potentially be a bigger location for family housing, right? Just because of the size and the schools and all that. But that's a real big trend that is happening as baby boomers, when people get older, less people getting married. And that is a huge trend that can make a big impact on real estate and taxes here.
Yeah.
So Todd, following up on what you were saying, what is the macro trend you're pointing out here? Are you saying that cities like Coppell will have a decrease in population, or are you saying?
I actually don't know. I don't know what the outcome is going to be, but I do know that with the mega trend is the demographics that are changing in the next 20 years. And then the subset of that is, what is it going to do to housing? So then based on the ages of folks and what we're currently seeing in Coppell, I mean, we can look 20 years ahead and say, do we understand if the population gets older, because this is a really attractive place to be for older and multi-generational families, we can have some recommendations as to what that's going to mean smart city wise. If it's going to be younger and much more single family, that's going to make a different impact as well. So I don't know what the answer is, Mesh, to your question. I just think it's something that is going to be a big impact. They'll be potentially different than what we are today.
Yeah, makes sense.
So coming out prior to COVID, the trend that we were seeing from a macro level is that the state of Texas and North Texas region, the population is increasing substantially. And we anticipated we would be impacted by that as well. And so that's kind of in the Future IQ study, that was one of the concepts that's there. I think it is interesting in this time because I forget who said it now, but folks saying, well, you don't have to live in the city. You can have the 1 acre, 2 acre, 5 acre lot. You can move out to wherever because you can work in corporate instead of being in downtown. Now I can live in my McMansion out in, close to the lake. And so I think that I just happen to be around lake people and because I am in boating, but I am seeing them buy up lake properties left and right at the moment. The markets are housing is booming around all of the lakes because people are now working from the lake. So not a terrible idea sometimes.
That background that you've got right now, Jared, you may be at the lake as we speak. I'm just wondering. So all I see is City of Coppell. So Jeff, where are we? Hey, there it is. Jeff, where are we with like Jeff, where are we with the overall kind of
Todd, could you repeat that?
picture items? Where are we with the overall kind of big picture items that we might want to go research before? We have to still decide on those meetings, and we were going to do that in 4 minutes. So this is a little bit of a time check for you as well. So if we nail down those bigger concepts and what our next steps need to be recapped in the next 15 minutes.
This meeting was till 9:30, correct?
8:30.
8:15.
Okay, there you go.
Oh, sorry.
But do you have more? Do you want to say, Ramesh?
No. For some reason, when I downloaded the calendar in the invite, it blocked my calendar from 6:30 to 9:30. So, I see that. Yeah, thank you, Todd. I'm happy that it's not till 9:30. So.
Okay.
You guys made my day.
Under promise and over deliver.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. I was sitting here thinking 3-hour meeting. While you come up with the meeting options for the next meeting, I like to throw out there that between the 8 of us, if there are areas that we feel passionate about, for example, let's say Moshul really knows energy, and maybe Moshul and Aaron really know energy. Maybe Todd and I really understand, technology, IT. I'm just making it up, right? So for the next meeting, we can read the Futurist magazine and come up with what we think would be the biggest impact in our area. So I heard real estate as something that Todd mentioned a couple of times. Patrick, I think, is in education, so he might be able to tell us some trends in education. So if we fall back to our core competence, perhaps each of us can come with 1 or 2 trends that we see, and we can. And if between now and then, if we have a template on how that trend has to be worded, as in, do we say with 80% confidence, we think this will happen in 10 years, and here is what New York is doing about it. Should that be the format?
I think format's a great idea. I mean, Jeff, just so for some consistency of how A, we're thinking, and B, we come back and present, or at least to have that discussion. And then the only thing I might add too is I've heard 10 years a few times, but I think we need to switch that to 20 years. We should say 20 years as like our baseline.
Okay. That's a good point. So if we see something happening in 5 years, what I'm hearing, Todd, is don't worry about it. Only worry about things that we think will happen in 20 years or later.
Yeah, it can be a result of what you saw. So if something you see is something happening in 5 years, the result of that will impact us down the road further. So what is that future piece?
Okay. Okay.
Does that sound that sounds reasonable to me for the next meeting, Ramesh? I assume that sounds reasonable to everybody. Okay. You want to? Anybody else have anything to say? Can we talk about the cadence for the next 2 meetings? If we go the normal cadence, the next time we meet is, I think it's almost 6 weeks away, September 14th. Does anybody have any problem with meeting on August 31st and fitting in an extra meeting for this futurist? Could basically continue the futurist discussion, but base it on research that we each individually would do. Does anybody have a problem with doing that on August 31st?
I'm good.
Everybody good?
Yeah, good.
Okay, so what we'll do is we'll get an agenda out for the next meeting then on August 31st. Good conversation tonight. Before we adjourn, does anybody have anything else they'd like to add?
The only, I mean, I threw out bringing Kent to a meeting. Is that of interest for one of these two next meetings?
So Jared, my 2 cents are, it looks like Kent is a transportation expert. And then since maybe next in the following meeting, we're going to focus on macro trends overall. Whenever we decide to talk about transportation, I think it'll be of great value to bring him in. So that's my 2 cents. I'll let you guys decide.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, you as well.
So Jeff, could you recap real quick? I want to make sure I understand what do we need to be prepared for on Monday the 31st? What do we need to come ready to discuss?
Well, I think let's put some direction out on it, but to paraphrase, we will focus the agenda on continuing the discussion around 2040. We will do our own individual research on the topics that we think impact smart city development. Those topics that impact cities and those things that are applicable to smart city roadmaps. And we'll come to the meeting on August 31st prepared to walk through what we think those items are. We will continue to track against the big five, but we will add to those big five because I think what the board feels, and I think this is right, is that it's not just the big five, there's other things the city ought to consider. So our research will be on those items that we feel as individuals that need to be brought to the table. We'll do the research, we'll come to the table with those things in the August 31st meeting. Is that right?
Are we assigning those to everybody in the recap? Like, will people raise their hands and go, I want to take that topic, or like to Ramesh's point, or are you going to kind of assign those in the recap for prep for the 31st?
My thinking is, I know I can't live just assign them here, Todd, unfortunately, but right. I thought maybe what I would do is to sort of read through what everybody had to say and maybe shoot out some feedback and say, because I need to kind of think through these items. Yep. Okay. So I might shoot something out and say, it looks like, I don't know, I'm making this up, but it looks like there might be a fairly significant consensus on cities in some manner generating their own power, or at least having policies around residents' ability to do that on their own. I don't know. I need to think through these. But if I think through them, yeah, we may send something like that out. Say, hey, does anybody want to dig deep on this topic or that topic? But I feel some processing. I need to process a bit.
Yeah, you need to take that space to do that. So Tiffany, question coming to you: if we're going to meet on the 31st, when does that have to be? When does that have to be announced again, just process wise?
I have to post everything by that Friday. I think it's like Friday afternoon.
So 26th, 27th, something like that is what you're saying. Whatever that would be.
The 28th.
28th. Okay.
Okay. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Quick question, Jared, will you be giving us access to that source? It'll be nice for us to, I don't want to reinvent the wheel. If there's a place where we can go read up on what other cities are doing, I would rather copy than recreate.
Sure. So the subscription that Mike has got is for Fast Company. The Futurist is out there, and then I can start to send you some articles related to smart city stuff that I see out there as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
And Tiffany, will you be sending out the email on how to access those articles?
I can.
Yeah, I think what I'll do is put links in there's a SharePoint document out there that we can just put links in. And if you have articles you want to add to it as well, I say go ahead and do that.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
So Jeff, just to be clear, we're meeting on the 31st. Then our next meeting would technically be 9/14. Is that correct?
That's what I
decided.
Yes. So long as everybody's okay with that cadence, I'd love to fit another meeting in.
All right, so 8:31 and 9:14, we should all mark our calendars and then wait for the official thing to come out.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, do we have a motion?
I'll motion to adjourn.
Okay. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, so we're adjourning the meeting. Tiffany, I've got 8:08.
All right,
How
perfect.
about that? How about that, Ramesh? 7 minutes faster. We just gave you back an hour and 15 minutes, Ramesh.
It's party time now.
Awesome.
Okay,
right.
everybody have a great week.
All right,
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Good night. Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.